Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason, a guy who doesn't necessarily know if he has any gambling family members.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And we're going to have GamAnon on today, which is like the Al-Anon version of Gambling Anonymous. Did I just say that right? I think so. Anyway,
I think so.
Yeah. So family members of people who have problem gambling or struggle gambling or addictive gambling or whatever the correct way of humanizing that is today, because I like the inclusive speech, the nice ways to say things. But yeah, so we're gonna have on Christine. We're gonna talk about what it's like to be in Gam-Anon, what they offer, what signs might tell you that you have a family member who has a problem or something you want to work on, and that's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was Gam-Anon. That's, a fellowship for, I guess family members suffer in these addictions as much as, or probably more than the individuals at times, because they're more innocent victims a lot of times. I mean, they have their role to play, but they're caught up in the drama as much as the using person.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think, gambling and addictive gambling and, obviously family members of people who struggle with those problems is something that we kind of disproportionately minimize. Like we're like, that's not a thing. It's just money. It's not their life. But I think there's going to be a lot of interesting information and insight in this episode. So looking forward to having Christine on, and we'll bring her on now. All right. Welcome, Christine. So we have Christine on today, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Gam-Anon and her experience. And so we'll turn it right over to you, Christine, and let you get into that.
All right. Thank you so much. So I was married to a compulsive gambler, and that's what took me to GamAnon. But the story really starts. So we started dating in college, and I knew he gambled, just like a lot of the guys we hung out with gambled, and some of the girls too, probably. But they bet on sports, and there was a kid in the basketball team who was a bookie and took the bets, and they just kind of was something that they did. And when we graduated, I kind of assumed that the going out drinking till 1 a.m. and the gambling and all the other things we did in college had kind of stopped. So we got married, and we're going along fine. And there were some occasions where this was around the time the internet was just starting. So there were these, there were a couple things that happened. There was at one point where he had won some money on a website and told me that it was not anything, it was free. It was a, and I didn't understand how these things worked, but he, told me it was this free site where you could just buy, chances of these kind of almost like raffle things. And he had won this money. And there were little things like that popped up over time, but I didn't really see a problem until about probably 8 years later. And it was really cold out and it was pouring rain. And my mother-in-law called me and said, "Oh my God, what are you doing with your roof? With the leaky roof that you have, how are you, this raining so hard, and what are you doing with the roof?" And I said, "What are you talking about, my roof?" And she said, "Well, the leak." And it was this very bizarre conversation, and she hung up. And I called my husband, and that's when I found out that he had told them that we had a leaky roof in order to get like 10 grand out of them to pay off a bookie. So that's kind of how things started to unravel as far as me finding out that this was going on. he had offered to take over our finances when I had my first daughter. I already did everything else, and he's good with numbers. And so, that was fine with me. Take the bill. So I didn't even bother with the bills. He paid all the bills. So I didn't really see, what was coming in and what was going out as much as I wish I had, but that was our deal. And so when this came to light, because I'm a very Anon type of person. So I'm a very, controlling kind of person. So I got on the internet and I started searching, and I found a therapist, and I found GA for him, and GamAnon for me, and started really digging into this. And I actually went to my first GamAnon meeting and kind of laid this out. And at that point, he had arranged for us to refinance our mortgage because there was a lot of credit card debt and whatever. We needed to kind of get back on track. And, he was sorry, and this was never going to happen again anyway. So, and I was very naive and the whole thing. And I went in and they told me, do not refinance your house. We need to make a plan here. Let's take this slow, let's do this the right way. And I told them, like, I don't even know if he has a problem. And, we need to take care of this. I didn't want all this debt hanging over us. And so I didn't go back for a while, and we refinanced the house and took out money to pay off these credit cards and all this. So that was in January. So fast forward, by the time we hit late November, early December, I was out of my mind. When you live with somebody who tells you the sky is green and the grass is blue, and it gets very, I just got very confused on which way was up and what was really going on. Over the course of that year, when I first found out he was gambling, it was only football, he told me. And then I caught him gambling on baseball, and then things came home from the casino, and, on and on and on. So there's a series very quickly over, less than a year of kind of getting the wind knocked out of me with these different revelations of things I found. And there were, the direct deposit didn't go in, and he told me that human resources had screwed up, and where was his check, and he was going to fight this, all these kinds of things that happened. So by the time we were at my parents' for Thanksgiving, and I can hear football on, he's in the other room and he's switching around, all these games. And I was like, what are you doing? And he said I was being very paranoid, because I said, I'm going back to GamAnon. I need help. I can't deal with this. I don't even know, like, what is happening. And, that would probably be good for you because you're, very paranoid, and you're worrying about things you don't need to worry about. So early December, I went back in. And at that point, I was at my bottom as far as just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I was done trying to figure this out and manage this and take care of him and solve all the problems that had come up, and was just like, just tell me what to do. So, they said the first thing was to kind of protect. We had no assets. We were negative in every account, but they said eventually there will be, you will have money. So, take what you have and your income that's coming in and put it somewhere safe that he can't access it. So I went into the bank and that week and was crying and talked to the bank manager and I just told him, I didn't know how to do this. So just told them, and they helped me open an account, and, I could transfer one way, but not the other. And that's kind of what started it. And then learned very quickly that, this was about me and my process and my ability to kind of focus on myself and live my life no matter what he was doing. And that's kind of, there's a whole lot in between there, but that's the idea.
I'm sure. Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. And
thank you.
I think my first reaction is just like empathy, because it sounds so tough to go through. It's interesting, I guess, from the perspective of maybe society, or at least the perspective of people who've dealt with substance abuse or misuse. Sometimes the gambling aspect of, the addictive process, or however we want to look at it, is maybe a little minimized to some degree, like, oh, it's not as dangerous. And I don't think people understand the statistics of the suicide rates, and really just even when you get past just people dying, like there's a lot of heartbreak in losing all this hard-earned money, and you save for retirement and that ends up missing, and it's tragic, really. There's a lot of tragedy in gambling as well.
Well, and you know what I find? That people come into GamAnon meetings a lot of times about the money. They come in with this, number and this money, and how am I going to manage this money? And pretty quickly they pivot to the lying, because the lying is really what is the devastating thing. The money you can figure out and work yourself back to. My credit score was horrible because my name was on everything. And there was a P.O. box I didn't know about where credit card bills were going, where he was taking cash advances out on these credit, and just all this stuff. But the lying is what really, I think, devastates people and is so hard to deal with that complete, broken trust.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So what does GamAnon identify as necessarily the problem for people who need GamAnon? Like, what is, for Narcotics Anonymous or something, it's like, oh, well, addiction's your problem. And Alcoholics Anonymous says, alcohol is your problem. Like or alcoholism. What is the problem? Do they go to codependency? Is that what they refer to, or?
So I think a lot of the Anon programs, so GamAnon, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, there's a lot of them now. It is support for the family member who's trying to deal with an addiction. So for GamAnon, it's a loved one or a family member who is trying to live a life involved with somebody who has a gambling addiction.
It's so interesting. I guess to frame it like that, it's a little fascinating to me, because I feel like that's kind of what, the other Anons will say too. And yet once, because I'm more familiar with Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, once you get in there, it's not what people think it is walking in. Like they think they're going to go in and figure out how to deal with this other person. And yet it's really a process of self in those programs.
It really is about looking at yourself, dealing with the issues that are making it worse for yourself. So a lot of us are jumping into this problem the second we see a crisis, trying to solve it, and people are living their lives for the addict. They're investing so much time and energy, and frankly, it's usually wasted time and energy because, for me, I was trying to solve problems that weren't even the real problems, because I only knew 20% of the truth anyway. So here I was dealing with things that weren't the truth of what was happening anyway. So, the addict always seems to be able to be a step ahead, probably because they're dealing with, what's really happening, and we're, playing catch up. But I think that it really is about helping you to be able to live a peaceful, serene life, even if that person is continuing to, act in their addiction. And if they go into recovery, it's, helping to understand that whole process too. We have people who come into GamAnon, and I felt this way too. Like you said, you want to come in, how are we going to fix this? It's been 2 months. Why is he still lying to me or acting like this? Let's go, grow up. And it helps to support people through what is a very long process and is not logical. So I think a lot of Anon people, we come to it as, all right, this is why we try to help the addict. It's only reasonable. If you do this, you lose. Don't do it. You lose money. Why would you go and do it again? You're missing that piece of the addiction, the compulsion, whatever, because we don't think that way. So, you partly are giving people an education about what this really is that you're dealing with, and what you need to do to first protect yourself, and second, to live a peaceful life and not, live on you can call it a roller coaster, you can call it a tornado, whatever you want to call it, that addiction is doing, not to keep jumping into it. And living it along with the addict.
It's interesting you said there, we don't have that piece. And maybe this is more of a personal question than a GamAnon stance question, but I'm curious, do you find that after doing some work that there is a little bit of the piece of obsession and compulsion for you as well? Like, is that, you're obsessed and compulsion about something a little different, like the fixing or the controlling of it?
So I've heard people say I'm a compulsive enabler because it really, you know, and that feeling of the other person is struggling and having to kind of sit on my hands to not jump in and interfere, you know, and not treat a grown person like a child, that I need to come in and solve it, and not, you know, it's a relearning it. So there definitely is. And, you know, even after all these years, we are who we are. And you know, my natural tendency is still to help people. I mean, you know, you have to learn like what is actually helpful and what in the end is not helpful. You know, when somebody's coming and asking you for money to pay a bookie, or they have this giant credit card debt and want you to pay it off, you know, it's kind of that short-term view and the long-term view. What's really helpful? Is it helpful for me just to eliminate this debt for that person, and now they can go back out and do whatever they were doing? In fact, they're an even better customer now for that bookie because they can pay off that debt really quickly, you know. So it's kind of relearning what it means to help this person. And sometimes that means really detaching from their problems. They're, you know, and letting them figure it out and solve it themselves, and work with their program to figure out how to solve these things.
I gotta say, I'm fascinated because I had the feeling coming into this, if somebody would have said, "Oh, what do you think the suggestions are in GamAnon?" I probably would have said, and I'm sure this is, you know, a little different for everybody, but I probably would have said, well, I would imagine if their partner continued the behavior, the suggestion would probably be to like get a divorce and have a retirement, right? At some point. And the way you stated it in your story, it didn't feel like that was even on the table as a suggestion. It felt more like, hey, if my partner keeps doing that, that's their business. I just need to protect me.
So my partner kept doing it, and we did get divorced in the end. But as far as GamAnon, the support is there no matter which way I decided to go. And I changed week to week, you know, for a while, and day to day, what I wanted to do. And I work with women all the time who are figuring this out. And we always say, we're there to support you no matter what. The goal is, no matter if you stay with him or you leave him, in the end, you're better off and you're a more whole person, and you can have peace within yourself and you know, live the kind of life that is about fulfilling your own, you know, wants and desires and needs and everything, and that you're safe and happy. Yeah.
When you went to GamAnon, were you in like a major metropolitan area, or are you kind of like in the outskirts in a rural town, or?
So I'm in the suburbs, and you know, this has been something with COVID where GamAnon is not as available as some of the other programs. You know, the Al-Anons especially have such a presence in every state. GamAnon is not as big. It's a lot newer. And, you know, for whatever other reasons, it's not as available as some of the other 12-step fellowships for family members. So with COVID, we've been able to have all of these virtual meetings now where people from all over the country, you know, can get on and meet people and get the support. No matter where they live, no matter if they have little kids and can't afford a babysitter, you know, all the barriers that were there before, it's really been an amazing thing. You know, I think we miss a little bit with the face-to-face, and I encourage people as meetings start to open up, and if you can do that, I think it's good to do also. But we've been able to be there for people who would have had to drive, you know, a ridiculous amount of hours to get to a meeting.
And Billy, feel free to tap me on the leg and jump in whenever you're ready. One of the things I was curious about, what I've noticed about Al-Anon and Nar-Anon more specifically, is in more metropolitan areas, there's a lot more meetings, and there tends to be a bigger focus on this 12-step kind of idea of recovery, whereas when you see these meetings in more rural areas, they tend to feel more like support groups. And not that that's a bad thing. Like, I still think they're doing a great thing, but I've noticed that the shift kind of moves away from the 12 steps to some extent. So I was curious what that's like in GamAnon. Is that like a hardcore thing, like the steps are the answer, or is it like, that's a piece of it, but we do a lot of other stuff too?
So I don't know about geographically because I only know, my area and the things that I've done. However, I do know people in other fellowships, and I think it's like everywhere else. There are people in GamAnon who are just there to unload each week and kind of tell their story. And there are people who really embrace the process more and want the process of going through the steps. And, we do every meeting, at least that I participate in, we read through the 12 steps and we talk about a different one each week in a little more detail. And then there is, step work that is done in a meeting with a sponsor, independently, that type of thing. We do have a 12-step workbook that, can help facilitate that for people. And, it's, even though we didn't have the addiction that necessarily, brought us in, it's still a process of looking at how we act in the world and how we interact with people and, where we've gone away from where we want to be and how we can come back and all of that and the spirituality piece. I'm glad you brought this up because yes, the 12 steps and God and the spirituality piece are an important part of it too. I think that's really a lot for brand new people who are just thinking about coming in to a bigger process, but it's absolutely based on. Talk about being out of control. It's not even you. The problem is just completely, you have to just admit you're powerless and then work on, the pieces that you have some control over, like the serenity prayer.
Right. It was fascinating to hear in Al-Anon that people have like their minds blown sometimes because when they realize that their life is controlled by drinking and they're like, well, I never drank. And they're like, yeah, but your life is still controlled by alcohol. Right. And that's fascinating. Yeah. Do you feel that same way? Like your life was controlled by gambling?
Yes. Huh. And, when I came into GamAnon, my two older kids were very little and I was missing stuff. I was so wrapped up in his drama and problems and whatever that I was missing stuff. So I was given the gift to be able to kind of focus on what was important, and it's like everybody, it's always a struggle to not get, even now, you have work, you have things, but to really focus on the present and the here and now and what's going on today. And, those lessons are valuable well beyond the interactions with the gambler, for sure.
When you were mentioning the spirituality and the step guide, all I could think of was 8 and 9. And I'm like, what the hell did they have to apologize for? but then when you just said the piece about like the family interactions you were missing and stuff like that, that kind of makes a little more sense. Could you talk a little more about that 8th and 9th though? I think that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people isolate when you're dealing with something so bizarre and so embarrassing or whatever you're putting, label you're putting on or how you're feeling. We don't want to tell people that the person we chose to marry or our son or our daughter or whoever is out stealing or went through our dresser last night and took money to go out and gamble with. And so a lot of people tend to isolate, make excuses. And some people, feel like we turn into liars ourselves because we don't want this to be our reality. So, making excuses why we can't go to this or that and those kinds of things. So that's a piece of it that comes from just the enabling the other person. Certainly our children, people have spent years and years while their kids are growing up focusing on the gambling, fighting about the gambling, all the different pieces that come with that. And part of the whole process is understanding our role. And certainly, one of the reasons I didn't go back to that very first GamAnon program meeting is because they told me I was as sick as him. And I was like,
Ooh.
oh no,
Yeah.
oh no, I am
Wow.
not. Do you know what he did? So, and I think that's a little harsh for a brand new person, but it was true. It was true, especially then. My head was all over the place, and I was running in 20 different directions and getting nothing done, and then missing out on the important stuff. So yes, so we have our own issues, no doubt, that and it impacts other people. And sometimes it's job stuff. I mean, people, it's the same as the addict. Sometimes we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing because we're running around fixing that problem, or there's a big ripple effect for everybody involved.
That's so fascinating that somebody said that to you. I mean, I agree. It's probably very true, but I'm like, can't you wait till like meeting 10 to say that? That's a little harsh.
Yeah. Well, probably because I was arguing with them. I was not the best. Like I said, by the time I went back later that year, I was so just done that I had no fight in me. I had no, but it's a natural tendency, especially when you're enabling kind of personality. You want to kill this person, but somebody else starts saying something bad and you're throwing your body in front of them, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a common piece to try to defend them and then get lost in that instead of focusing on why you're there.
I feel like in our society, drug misuse or substance misuse is really easily identifiable, right? Oh, you're using substances that are illegal. Well, that's obviously bad, right? I think alcohol misuse tends to get a little harder to see, but I think even further, gambling addiction would probably be one of the hardest to recognize. I mean, just thinking about it myself, I was like, well, does bingo count? Like, does, people go to casinos? Is it only online? What about fantasy football betting? What about, and then Billy just said this morning, lottery and scratch offs. And I'm like, Christ, I forgot all about that, right? My mom does a lot of scratch offs. Is she a gambling addict? So what kind of ways would you really be sure that your loved one was struggling with a gambling addiction versus just what's acceptable in our society?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And first of all, GamAnon has no opinion on gambling. So if people want to go we're not anti-gambling. That's an adult, if you're of legal age, that's something you can do. And I think looking at the parallels with drinking helps people to understand. So the problem comes in when it starts to impact the daily, day-to-day life responsibilities and activities. So you're missing out on family events, or you're missing work. That's an obvious kind of, problem. You're borrowing money. So you're using money you don't have. You're borrowing money in order to gamble because, you're going beyond your means in order to do this. There is a list. There's a list of 20 situations, I guess, that people can look at on the GamAnon website that says, are you living with a compulsive gambler? And it's those kinds of events. So, if bill collectors are calling because of the gambling, the hiding, if you as the spouse or the mother or the parent or who's sibling or whatever, feel the need to go through the person's wallet and check up on money and spending and those things, like all of these are kind of red flags. And any one thing could be, something else. But when you start ticking off the list of many, many different red flags, then, it indicates that this has gone beyond just what the average person can do. People can go into a casino and they come in with $100, and when they spend their $100, it's gone. Or if they win, they take it and they leave, whereas a person who has a problem will hit the ATM machine a couple more times, call somebody for some more money, win a bunch of money, and then gamble that all away. And, it's just a different way of interacting with the activity. That's just not how, somebody without the addiction would act.
Right.
But that interfering with your daily relationships and activities is probably the biggest.
Okay, and we'll be sure to put a link up to that questionnaire in the show notes for this so anybody can easily go take that. I'm curious,
This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause.
Do you find in your experience that people in Gam-Anon tend to shy away from any gambling, or do they have a healthy relationship with it, or not really any indication either way?
So everybody's different, and everybody comes in with a different story and history. I mean, I've seen people who dealt with this for 25 years with the spouse, and they want nothing to do with it. And I know people who still, have a trip they do every year to Vegas with their girlfriends, and they still go do that. They don't bring him, but that kind of thing. So I think everybody's, I will tell you personally for myself, I don't have an issue with it so much, but when I see the extremes, then that bothers me, and I think we have our own triggers just like everybody else, and it's different for everybody. And there's different kinds of betting. A lot of compulsive gamblers will bet on anything they can, but some people are mostly the horse track or casinos or sports betting, and then they'll and then some people just do everything. So, or lottery, like you said, or bingo. I mean, I know somebody who the spouse is at the bingo hall every night till 2 a.m., 3 a.m. That's again, when it becomes extreme and you're not home and you're not able to do the things you need to do for your family because that other love is coming first.
It's always fascinating to me, especially in 2022, to hear the horse track, because it's something that has never been a part of my life. And so I'm always like, people really go do that still?
Well, and what's, the way things have changed over the years. So when I first came into GamAnon, like I said, it's been a while. So technology was different. And then we didn't all have smartphones. But the more things have evolved with technology, you can, there's usually an OTB channel on most cable stations. First of all, you can watch the horse race from anywhere. And then, the same with the ability to bet on things, has gotten easier and easier because you don't have to leave your house anymore.
Right. So what would be some signs once you're, like, say I went to a Gam-Anon meeting and I needed some assistance? What do I look for in the people that I want guiding me? Like, what kind of signs show that you're sort of maybe in this healing recovery process of dealing with your partner? And what signs might be like, oh, hey, that person's really not doing anything quite yet?
So I think part of the whole process of going through a fellowship like GamAnon is learning to trust your gut. I think that's part of what gets us in trouble to begin with, is things are happening that don't seem right, and we're believing ridiculous stories or making excuses or whatever. At least in my case, that's what happens. Ignoring these red flags. So I think, people that you feel, especially in the beginning, people you feel comfortable with, people you identify with. I don't think, I think like anything, it's a little different when you're a parent versus a spouse, although the behaviors of the addict are the same. There's for some people, I think it's a little, the challenges are a little different because one, you're relying on them for income, and one, they're your child, and there's just different pieces. So some people choose to, look for a sponsor or reach out to people who've had similar life experiences. That's one way. But I think it's mostly just people that you're comfortable with and who sound serene, who sound comfortable in their own life, who are truthful. I had people give me some hard truths. I can remember being in meetings and laying out this crazy story and saying, but what could I do? There's nothing I could do. What could I do? And people would say, you could do this, you could have done this, you could have done that. And I'd be like, oh my God, it didn't even occur to me. I was so wrapped up in him and his version of things so that learning to detach and learning to think for myself and all that takes somebody who's going to be really honest with me, and reflecting back, the nonsense sometimes that I'm spouting out as like to clarify. Do you realize it's the same thing you've said 3 weeks? It's a different situation, but this is the same story, because that happens.
Right. It's interesting, I guess. I don't know how this goes for everybody. I'm sure there's a little personalized difference. But I'm picturing that if I was married to an alcoholic, say, and I went to Al-Anon and I, was working on myself or whatever, and then I ended up divorcing my alcoholic partner and not having that in my life anymore, I feel like my inclination might be, well, I don't need Al-Anon anymore. But you have related, divorcing your partner at some point, and yet you're still in GamAnon. Do you want to talk a little about that?
So for me, 90% of that is about 12-step kind of, the piece. People were...
That's okay. Take your time.
People were so good to me and gave so much time and energy, and I would call them at work, and it's such a hard thing to go through, and a lot of times you feel so alone. I had threats of bookies coming here to break his legs, which honestly by that point I was like, go ahead. But I had his mother saying, oh no, we can't, you have to do something, so at each point there were different issues. But I had like I said, bill collectors calling. I had checks taken out of the middle of the checkbook so you wouldn't notice, along with the carbon copy. I couldn't find my deed at one point because he'd given it to I had to register my daughter for kindergarten. I couldn't find the deed. Like, I've had these things happen that most people can't imagine. So to be able to share that, or when someone tells a story like that, just say, oh yeah, that sounds about right. And the lying kind of stuff. I mean, we were going to sue Citibank because they took his check. They didn't take his check. He went and cashed it at some, check cashing place. And just the things that, happen that are so unrelatable, I think, to most people. Mm-hmm. So to be able, so that's a big part of why I still do this. When COVID started, I actually worked with somebody else and we opened a virtual only room. So a lot of rooms moved to virtual, but this is a virtual only room that I hope to keep going even once places open in person. And it's going back to that, there's areas of the country, my hope is then a lot of these people in the pockets of the country where there aren't any in-person meetings will start a meeting also. So there'll be that resource, and it's a way to kind of spread the access around. And then, like I said, the other piece of it is I am who I am. I still have my tendencies. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me, I have children with this person, so I still deal with him. There's still crazy things that happen around, I'm not involved in it day to day, but he's the father of my kids. So there's that piece. And I also remember somebody saying to me one time, if you don't take care of yourself and heal yourself, you're going to end up with another version of him. So that kept me going for a long time too, is just, I needed to know who I was and and find my own voice and my own, self before I got sucked into that again. Because there's obviously something there that attracted me. When I look back at people, I was like, I was always with the crazy person for one reason or another. Yeah.
When you look at the official GamAnon literature, and I know you've used the word enabling some, does enabling and codependency, like, do those words pop out in the official literature? Like, how do how does the literature describe your dilemma or what you're going through?
Yeah, I don't remember seeing codependency anywhere, although it's certainly an issue and people read their own books and have their own, go to therapy and do things to deal with that. And they're very intertwined a lot of times. The enabling piece and the control piece are the two that pop out a lot, because it's just such a combination of attributes that make us a good match, for someone who doesn't want to take responsibility, or, we allow or we enable the other person to have the time and the resources to go and spend, on that, on their addiction, because we are a lot of times taking care of the, A to Z and scheduling and fixing and all the other pieces. So those are the two things that I hear out of people's mouths a lot, and I see in the literature.
Okay.
The control piece is big. And it's a false thing. It's not real. We don't have control, but you want to control, so you jump in deeper and deeper and deeper.
Right. A lot of the other 12-step type fellowships and programs we interact with, they create a sense of fellowship. I mean, there's even the idea, not so much in the 12-step fellowship, but the idea that like isolation is part of addiction. And you mentioned isolation earlier a little bit, and that this, bringing back to community and connection is part of the solution. But I feel like those programs and fellowships, rely heavily on that. And almost, I want to say, not always, but a lot of times, kind of your whole environment revolves around people that are also in that program, right? I generally am only friends with other people who used to use substances that are now in recovery. I'm curious, is there that same sense in GamAnon, or like, are a lot of your friends from that program now, or do you also have, normal or typical friends as well?
I think it's a very individual. I've seen that happen for sure. And what happens a lot actually too is you'll have couples. So a lot of people who are in GA and GamAnon together hanging out. So, they have the person in GA and the person in GamAnon with other, people who are involved in those fellowships. But I absolutely have made very good friends who I see outside of, GamAnon meetings, that will go have dinner together. I mean, this is all like, when we could go have dinner at a restaurant,
Right.
but, or people will have parties and have people over to their houses, just a friendly, social event. That absolutely happens.
Okay. Does GamAnon have the same sort of special events that other places might have? Like, if you go to a 12-step fellowship, a lot of times there's like, we have dances or softball groups or coffee meetups or conventions even. Does GamAnon have any of that?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I was kind of surprised, actually.
Yeah. I mean, we've done some conferences alongside GA. So it'll be a weekend conference where you'll have both GA speakers and GamAnon speakers, and then you'll have some individual meetings for each, and some workshops that are open to everybody, and then some that are, some activities that are GamAnon only, certainly. Yeah, we did, different, like some of them are social, some of them are more, so we have unity offices, at the local level, and then ISO as the international office. So sometimes even as a fundraiser, there'll be those kinds of, like you're talking about, some of the other kinds of activities that'll happen.
Okay. So typically, and this definitely changes from area to area depending on how populated it is, and maybe some other 12-step fellowships, there's kind of a typical meeting outline to some extent. I know it varies a little bit, but what could someone expect if they were walking into a GamAnon meeting and they were kind of nervous about it? What would it really look like for that hour? Is it an hour? I should say that.
It depends. I've seen all different, times. Ranging anywhere from an hour. I've even seen 2 hours, It just depends. So the outline, and I would encourage anyone try to get there on time for the beginning, because you get a chance to, they're probably going to ask you, if this is your first meeting, and then so they can make sure you have a book to read from. A lot of times they'll give you a newcomer's packet, which just has some papers, literature, that you can take home and read through, that explains some of the basic principles of GamAnon and what to expect. And then every meeting I've been to, then we do some readings out of a book that, again, just pretty much outlines and reminds us all of what is GamAnon, and we read through some suggested points and the 12 steps, and talk about anonymity and just some of those basic foundation pieces at the beginning. And then there's usually a topic, and the person chairing the meeting usually picks a topic. Sometimes it's more of a speaker meeting, but I don't see those as much as GamAnon. It's usually a topic. And then everyone, speaks on their own experience about that topic. And if you're brand new, you can certainly just talk about, they're just going to let you talk about why you're there and what happened and what brought you there. And then after you speak about why you're there, people will give suggestions. Most GamAnon meetings I've been to are comment meetings, so people can make a few suggestions, ask a few clarifying questions. In the very beginning, they'll likely focus on the protection piece, to put some of those things in place right away. Make sure you're, not leaving your credit card out, not, the things that can put you at further risk. Run a credit report on yourself, some of those kinds of pieces, just to start to get a picture of what's really going on. And then that's it. Then they'll usually give you a few phone numbers, because, things don't just happen once a week. Stuff comes up, and then there are people you can reach out to. And one of the things that we talk about to a lot of people, and I definitely needed the message, was you can tell the other person, you don't have to answer them right away, I guess is the point. So when, a lot of times the addict, everything's very urgent, and it needs to happen right now. You need to give me an answer. I need to know. It's that pressure. It's that. And one of the ways we can start to get ourselves back is to say, you know what, I need to think about it. Let me call somebody. I'll get back to you, those kinds of things. So you start to work on your own timeline instead of that other person's. And I know that's not probably what you asked, but yeah, that's kind of what you can expect. That's the basics.
Okay, that's awesome. How would someone, I'm trying to ask this because I feel like it's a slightly different question than how do you know your partner has a problem? How would someone know for sure that this is where they needed to go, per se? Like if they're thinking about it.
Right. Well, and to go back actually to do they have a problem piece, I've seen this especially with parents a lot, because a lot of times then the gambler is younger, hasn't done this, a lot of times a spouse, there's some bigger damage and problems. With a child who's maybe 18, 20, 24, it can be a little bit, and they're the parents. And so there are people who come and say, I don't know if they have a problem. I don't know if I should be here. And what we say is, give it some time. Ideally, give it 90 days, come back and get an education. What's the worst that's going to happen? And if they don't have this problem, you've learned and you know what to watch out for and whatever. And the same with spouses or any other family member. I mean, we've had girlfriends who are like, should I get married to this person? We've had, cousins and siblings and all kinds of relationships. So it's really for anybody who's trying to deal with this, but it's okay if you don't know for sure if it's a problem and you don't know if you should be there. That's okay. And you can say that and just listen and get an education on that piece. As far as your question about, is it the right thing for me? Look, it's a volunteer kind of deal. It's you come, and if you're feeling better at the end than you did at the beginning, that for me was, I always left there feeling better. So even though every problem didn't get resolved and something would smack me upside the head, the next day, and I always felt better, and I had people to reach out to who would support me and who understood. If you call a family member or a friend and say, he just did this or told me this, their advice might not be as informed with, dealing with the gambler and the lies and some of the other pieces that come with it. So I had people I could call who already knew. I didn't have to explain the whole backstory and reasoning and all the other pieces that came along with it. So, but I would say the same thing, give it a little time. I mean, I told you, I went into a meeting and was like, they want me to cut off my nose to spite my face. What do they know, but by the time I went back, I was ready. And that's what has to happen sometimes. Sometimes you're not ready. It's not easy because, we don't sit around and bash the gambler, or we don't solve the problem of the gambling. People are looking for usually one of those two things. And it's about looking inside, which is really not an easy process. But, I feel like I have matured so much thanks to GamAnon, figured out who I am and what I want, and, and can be helpful to other people, and all the things that it's given me. It's not about him anymore. It's not about the gambling anymore and mine, but yeah, just, I guess you give it a chance, and there's no reason you can't find other resources at the same time. We have people who also go to individual therapy, couple therapy, different things, but there are tools that GamAnon can offer, especially that just, somebody who's been there before.
Did you tell the girl who was thinking about getting married to run?
I mean, she got a dose of reality.
That's funny. So I'm assuming, and I'll ask the question anyway, but I am assuming that since you are still a member of the program, that there's no graduation, or there's no ending to it, or there's no like, oh, I figured this out, I don't need this anymore. No,
there's no, it's I mean, what's the saying about when you're finally done working on yourself? That's the end. I don't know how, but there's, it's that idea. I mean, there's always room for improvement. We are who we are. We can work on those different, characteristic pieces about ourselves that we don't. I still tend to fall into peacemaking, not wanting to rock the boat, and that's okay sometimes. I say I was the kid that every teacher loved because I went along with the rules. I took care of it. I did these things, but those same qualities then put me into positions where I just didn't say, get out of here, or figure it out yourself, or, some of the kind of healthier things that would have happened. So.
Okay. And just to clarify, you had said if you come in and you're not sure, give it some time. And you were talking about like maybe 90 days. You mean while attending, right? Like you're not saying like go away and give it some time and then come back. You're saying
no.
Stick it out and learn some stuff.
Come, try to go to at least one meeting. It's nice to find a meeting you go back to regularly because people get to know you and you get to know them. And, I think that's a great way, but there's lots of, if you go to a meeting and it doesn't, it doesn't feel like it doesn't click with you and it doesn't feel like the right match, there's lots of others that you can, go. For me, I find that when I go to different GamAnon meetings, it's very similar. It's the same story and same people and, a lot of same situations and just different, different faces, but a lot of the same. And I just love the energy of people supporting each other and being there for each other. And yes, give it not, come for a few months, come and listen and see if, where you are at the end of it, and then do what makes sense for you. And no one's ever going to tell you what you have to do. It's all suggestions based on our own experience of how we handled a certain situation. And you can take it or you can leave it. And just because I divorced the compulsive gambler does not mean you will. And if you don't, then, we'll look at how you can do that in a way that you can still stay healthy.
And you mentioned like suggestions and clarifying questions, which to me like set off these alarms in my head. That's crosstalk. We don't do that, right? Because, in my particular fellowship, we generally don't have crosstalk, but it sounds like that's kind of encouraged or allowed in GamAnon.
Yeah, so we allow comments. There are likely GamAnon meetings that don't, but everyone I've been to allows comments. So after somebody shares, people around the room are allowed to make comments. The comments should be from their own experience with a similar situation. So it's not really giving advice. It's sharing, oh, you know what, that happened to me. And I tried this and I tried that. And this is what finally, helped me to deal with it, or whatever the case. But every GamAnon meeting I've been to has allowed comments, at least a regular meeting. That's not like an open, speaker meeting kind of thing.
Right. Do you find that the membership skews more towards females in GamAnon?
It does, in my experience, although, my current meeting that I have online, we do have a husband, we do have a brother, we do have quite a number of fathers. So it's not all. And I think it's changing too. And it's hard because online is different now than when we were in person. But when we were in person, we usually had one man, maybe a father or a husband at a time. People come and go, but there's more now where I am. So I don't know if that's the times changing or just the access of the online.
I got to be honest. I never even pictured the parents. I don't know why. Like, that's such a huge thing in Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, and yet it never occurred to me that like younger kids were struggling with gambling. Honestly, so that's fascinating to me.
Well, and that was probably going to be one of my questions I thought of is, as we've seen this, I don't know what you want to call it, easier access to gambling. Have you seen any changes in? I don't know that you're going to be able to identify the problems of gambling, but the folks coming into GamAnon looking for help, has that changed since access to gambling is so easy nowadays?
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen more parents over the years, and I don't know, I can't say that that's any kind of correlation. I know there's all kinds of research out there and resources for if a parent wants to find out those numbers. The number of kids, and I mean, I say kids, sometimes they are under 18, sometimes they're college age kids. I see a lot of that personally, parents of college age kids, or, that kind of time frame. And back to your point of how normalized it can be, I think people see gambling as a much more, a less harmful activity for teenagers or for younger people. So they might be okay with a poker game in their basement, or their kids participating in the boxes for the Super Bowl pool, or some of these other things that happen where they wouldn't give their kid a drink or, something, but they would allow them to participate in the gambling. But, it's definitely, what I can say I've seen is, more and more people who are, you can use your phones now for anything. You can place a bet with a bookie on your phone. Wow. It's you don't have to go into the OTB or, meet the guy around the corner or whatever used to happen. It's just, so the accessibility is there for everybody now. It's easier. You can move money around so much easier. Just everything is easier now as far as access.
I almost laughed when you said you got the calls about people coming to your house to break his legs, because I was like, oh my God, that seems so 1940s mobsterish. I was like, that sounds like a story I would make up to have someone call for me to get more money.
Yeah. And it's a really hard thing. And you can never tell somebody, don't worry, that's just something he probably made up. Sometimes It is something, who knows? I mean, I have experience with different bookies, not my experience, but having, they're coming, they're going to get him fired. They're going to, whatever. I still don't know what was true and what wasn't true.
Yeah. It's gotta be so tough, worried about the care of someone you love and not being able to know what's real and what's fantasy. And I imagine that's probably a big part of the struggle you felt. You talk about the lying being the big piece. Like, what life am I really living? I don't know, right? That's so scary.
Yeah. And, there's a good trick that I think addicts or people that lie use, and they give you, when you find out something or you figure out something, they give you 20% of the truth. So you're like, okay, now I know. Well, there's all this other stuff, but you relax, you let down your guard because you feel like they've been honest. And so it's a really, it can really mess with your head as far as, like you said, knowing what's what's really happening. And, we tell people, I've heard people say, oh, but I know he's stopped gambling now. I know he hasn't gambled since this date. And you don't know. You just don't know. Because like you said, you don't smell it on people. You don't. And a lot of times somebody who's lived that life for a long time gets really good at lying and can look you in the eye. And I think this is when we go back to that heartbreak piece of people who, start worrying about the money and then get to the lying piece. It's like, how can this person look me in the eye and tell me, oh no, that wasn't me. Oh no, I didn't, or whatever. And just, it's not true. So
I'm being quiet because we can't, if we laugh out loud or make noise, we can't hear you on Zoom, but I am dying inside that you can't smell it on people. That's hilarious. I've never thought about it, but that's funny. You can't really, you have to have access to the books to know
to the money.
What's going on with this to some extent.
I mean, there are people in GamAnon who will tell you they can tell when the person's gambling and tell when the person's lying. And I think people get tells, but and certainly there's a personality change in a lot of people, where these outbursts of anger or things that just don't make sense can be a red flag. But you just you don't know what's going on with somebody else. If they don't want you to know, then you can't be sure that what's really happening.
It's so interesting that they have a tell sign, right? Like maybe they get more anxious or agitated or whatever. But like when I think of gambling, I think of like poker and having a tell being a bad thing. And I'm like, oh, maybe they shouldn't be gambling if they have a tell. So what would be the best place if somebody was ready to explore GamAnon? Should they go to the GamAnon website? Is that like the best place to find a meeting and find information about it?
Yeah, there's information there that you can certainly read through and get more, of an idea of what it's all about. Those 20 questions are on there. And there's a packet for newcomers on there that's available to download, for anybody. And then there's also a list of meetings. So you can either sort by your location and look for an in-person meeting, or there are a number of I think the last time I looked, there were like 30 some virtual meetings. So pretty much every day of the week, different time zones. And I know for mine, we have people from both Canada and the US who come on. But yeah, all over the country, all over the world. That's accessible to anybody now. And whatever you come in with, whatever story you have to tell, that's people there have heard it before. And they can start to give you some support.
That's awesome. And we will definitely have the link to that website in the show notes as well. If somebody wanted to reach out through the contact us on that page and just really wanted to talk to somebody, is that an okay thing to do? Like if they're not ready to go to an actual meeting, if that feels a little too much?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are hotlines. Sometimes there are local hotlines as well, but you can certainly call, the GamAnon office that's on the site. There are programs available. So, for example, if you lived in a part of the country where there were no meetings prior to COVID, when we had online meetings, there was a letter writing, opportunity for people. People have shared, that way. And then, they can help to connect you to, to whatever else you're looking for.
That's so awesome. Did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share, Christina? No pressure if you don't. It's okay.
I would just say that if you think there might be an issue, that there might be a problem, then something's going on. And it's worth coming, go to a GamAnon meeting, see what it's all about, and see if it doesn't make you feel a little bit better and start moving forward, on your path to your own recovery.
Well, we thank you so much for spending your time here today to help people to understand more about GamAnon and if it may be right for them. And thank you for sharing part of your personal story with us. That really means a lot to us. And I'm proud of your recovery. It's incredible. I'm glad you're a person that's available for the next batch of people that come in and need somebody that understands. And I wish you well on your journey.
Thank you. And I appreciate you getting the word out too to people. So
awesome. All right. Thank you, Christine.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.